So welcome to the Node.js Node API team meeting for June 21st, 2024. We'll follow our standard approach of looking at the issues which are in the API stable node repo and tagged with milestone 11. So let me share my screen. I don't want to go in the right window. There we go, I think. Back and see if I can get the chat. And I also want to see if I can get the participants in case we get. Okay, so any announcements or news that people would like to share? I think what I did see is last time we'd discussed the mention of Node Swift here, and I did see that Nicola had PR'd in that into our list and landed that, so that's good.
Perfect.
And then so in terms of the other issues we have tagged here for printing a message for NAPI experimental, NoSQLite performance, code coverage or debug testing. Does anybody have anything we should chat about this week?
I want to talk about a little bit about the coverage.
Okay.
I noticed because Gabe made an issue that we're not doing experimental in Windows, which we discussed, I think, last week as well.
Yeah.
But I also noticed that our test coverage does not run experimental right now either.
Hmm.
And this
Okay.
sort of relates to the PR that I'm working on with the Node.js finalizer, which is only really implemented in experimental. So it
Yep.
looks kind of odd when you're looking at my PR that we don't have any coverage shown. Um, so, and I just wanted to bring it up that, maybe we can make a new issue or modify Gabe's issue to point out that we need to also modify our coverage CI.
Right. I mean, my simplistic thought is we should just turn it on. Like, does that mean we wouldn't cover other things, or do we need to run both?
Well,
Or
we basically have to collect coverage compiling our add-on under different NAPI version definitions. Because right now we basically just do the coverage with the default supported Node API version that's being used when we're compiling. So we only do that sort of one run. And in order to do experimental, we'd have to, compile multiple times and then also figure out, joining the results together. Because I think we've also had maybe an issue that I haven't had time to investigate because I've been working on this, but that, maybe our coverage files are being overwritten by sub-processes that are started. So, if we're going to run Node multiple times with an add-on that's built under different versions, then we'd also have to figure out how to correctly
right.
do that joining. So I think it's a good idea, yes, to have coverage on experimental, but it's not as easy as just, turning it on, I would say.
Like, again, I'm probably missing something, but like at one point, I think, and I think it's changed. Like at one point, experimental would have been like a superset of everything, right? Because it would include additional functions, but like we never removed or really changed the behavior functions. Now with what we've done to change Node add-on API, like change like so that we can change behavior as we move up to new versions of Node API, that changes a little bit. But like if we were going to run one, I'm still wondering if running under experimental will give us like the higher coverage versus not at this point. And I totally agree with what you said. And like what we should probably figure out how to do is to run multiple times with the different ones so that we get the total coverage. But I still am wondering, should we just turn on experimental in our test in our coverage runs because that will give us more than we lose, is kind of what I'm thinking.
I see what you're saying. Um, I don't know off the top of my head if there's any paths in our code that's preprocessor definitions that says if experimental this, otherwise this, because if that's the case, then we would have the non-experimental path not tested.
And I guess there are some of those, like in your PR, for example, right? Like they use a new feature which is currently only available through experimental, I think, right?
Um,
Like that,
yes.
right? Like, yeah. So the thing, the answer is probably right. Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, it would be best to run on under different versions,
Right.
yeah. But maybe in the short term,
I'm just
just
I'm
turning
okay.
it
Go
on.
ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, like which is the we couldn't run under experimental before, so it wasn't an option, but now that we're getting there,
Right. Yeah, so just something to bring
yeah,
up.
okay.
So I don't know if we wanted to make a new issue or just update Gabe's issue to also talk about coverage.
Which one was that? This one?
That one, yeah.
I would my first thought is like a new issue because like we might turn on experimental and that sounds like a simpler thing to do, right? Is turn on experimental for CI for
Yeah.
Windows. And then it's more complicated to say, yeah, we should refactor our coverage to test multiple configurations and like it may be like we'll want experimental, we'll want the default Node API version, not 8.
Right.
Actually, I think like going forward, we might want like 8, 9, 10
Yeah. You
because
know, whatever we decide how we build our CI out, it should be, expandable to test
yeah,
everything else. Yep. So I'll create a new issue for that then.
okay. Any on those sort of other ones in the list, any other ones we should talk about before we look at stale issues? Okay, if not, let's jump into stale issues. And I don't think I've seen any new ones recently. So yeah, I don't think there's too much to chat about there. And so we could dive into the issues in ABI stable node. I see we don't have any, oops, no, I'm in the wrong one. Sorry. No, AP. Okay, we just have a few pull requests. Kevin, this one's still in draft, I see, so still work in progress.
Yeah, I'd like to, if we can go back to that one. So I did end up figuring out how to make every finalizer either be callable with a no-GC env or a regular env.
Okay,
Uh,
excellent.
so now, like, basically, there were no changes to any of our test files because it's smart enough to do the wrapper. And then I added new tests that check that if you have a no GC wrapper, it correctly does no GC and everything like that. So the question though that I have now is that what we wanted to do? Because I could see it may be like a problem for developers to figure out that, if they use one finalizer type versus the other, they will have different behaviors with how their finalized callback is ran. It would really be up to the documentation and understanding, when to use what, because if they just use a simple, delete data finalizer type, they should use the node.js env, but oh, maybe they forget or they don't understand the difference correctly, or they just copy and pasted some code from somewhere else and are just modifying it for their usage, and they wouldn't understand that they should use the node.js env so that it can properly clean up data without having to wait for the garbage collector to have ran, and have this memory leak issue or whatever that we're trying to solve.
I think that's a documentation thing. Like we can add some extra documentation saying, because we do cover finalizers, right? And so this is an important sort of aspect that we should cover. So
Okay.
let me see if I understood this correctly. So the developer still has to create a finalizer with the right signature in order for us to be able to decide whether to add post finalizer or not.
Correct. Right. So right now
Okay,
they
that's pretty good.
yeah, they can compile everything under experimental and not have to change any of their code, and it'll be wrapped in post finalizer. And then as soon as they change their signature from uh, env to no GC env, then it will not be wrapped and then do it correctly.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
Because
it's like
then
really
we have an easy thing. It's just like we point at and it's just replace that with Node.js and all your troubles go away. That's a very, very good tool. Awesome.
Right.
the
And
only
then
thing.
it'll be, since it's like at runtime, if for some reason they just change the type and then they are using some JavaScript end function, it will end up complaining that, oh, you can't use this.
Awesome. That's exactly what we want. Yeah, I mean, that's what our documentation will say. Just replace that, but be sure that you are making no JavaScript calls or else your code will fail to compile. Awesome.
Okay, perfect. Then the implementation is pretty much ready then, and I'm just working on documentation updates now.
To your original
Yeah.
question, the only one thing I'm wondering about is there any way where we can nudge them to do the right thing, which is to use an OGCM unless they need to use the other one, right? Like, would there be any way of giving them warnings or like any thoughts on that? Because I think that's what you were kind of getting to is like it may be too easy for somebody to just do the wrong thing. So I don't know if there's any ideas on what we could do to help them understand, like, hey, you did this, this is the consequence. And documentation certainly is our first thing.
I also
Yeah.
wonder if we can use some kind of some names like say like this type of finalizers are kind of deferred finalizers and this finalizers like an immediate finalizers or something like this. So get through some namings as well.
Mhm.
People.
I think that's not bad, but I'm not sure. I mean, it depends on how well versed the developer is in memory management. They may or may not understand that deferred means that they're gonna get batched at the end of a event loop run, and if it's a tight loop, then they're not gonna run until the event loop gets a chance, which it may not. Like the concept of deferred to
Mhm.
when,
Or for example, like
but.
next tick finalizer, like like
Yeah.
some kind of so people would still like feel like yes, there's some kind of finalizer which we can maybe like change variable name like which will not affect any existing code, right? But if people
Mhm.
look, for example, code completion, something, they'll say, oh, this is kind of type of finalizer which like next tick or something like I don't know.
Yeah,
Right,
that's not bad.
or like Because if they're using the regular env, it might be like a suboptimal, like something that triggers them to say, I'm not doing the best I potentially could, maybe, right? Like, but it's like, I guess for the developer, they don't really need to, what they need to understand is like, am I calling any JavaScript or not? Is that the, like, I guess we're no GC, we called it no GC, but really is it no JavaScript? That, like from a developer, do I run
Yeah.
any JavaScript in my finalizer or not, right? And if I don't, I can get a more optimal implementation versus if I run JavaScript, still all works. It's just like that costs, right? So it's the giving us the hint that you don't run JavaScript means that you can now go faster. I don't know if that like, would it make sense? And I guess like we probably don't want to do this because this would break existing ones, but like if you had to opt in to allowing regular env finalizers, that would be one way where it's like, okay, I'm understanding that I'm actually writing finalizers that use JavaScript and those things, you know, so if I had to define opt into that, but we could define that says like, don't allow that. So you wouldn't do it without, you know, you could say, I'm choosing to define this and therefore, yeah, it's not actually going to allow it unless I actually decide to do it.
We're right in front of a major version release. So if we're going to break anything, now would be the time.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Right.
I still like to avoid breaking, like even if we can, I don't think it like I'd still like to avoid it unless we really think it adds a ton of value, right?
Right. So going back to Michael, what you kind of said about having it be opt-in to use the feature,
Yeah.
to use whatever, I could see it such that if you do, if you have experimental on and you are opting in to require your finalizers to be no GC, that could be an option so that it forces you to go through your code and see if you can just simply change your parameter to no GC, or if you have to move it out to explicitly use a post finalizer. So you can make it somewhat that with preprocessor definitions that it would require you to update your finalizer code. Because right now there's nothing that requires you because it uses this dynamic choosing, but we can make it so that it's not dynamic.
Right. Or I was thinking more like leave the dynamic thing, but maybe if there was a define that says like force no GC finalizers, it would then error if you tried to use a non.
Yeah, I think we're on the same.
Like a way to opt into
yeah,
saying, I want to do it the best way, and then I can find all my places, fix them all.
right.
But by default, it still lets you just keep on running, right? Because they've been running before and they haven't had a problem. So I don't think we necessarily want to stop them from running, but
Right. So yeah, I think we're thinking the same thing. So that is something that we could do,
yeah, I
but
don't know if
I
that's,
don't know.
I'm a little weary of adding more preprocessor directors because we already have quite a few. Like we have
well,
things for
there is
like
that. Yeah.
like maybe we have things for like maybes and
Yeah. True.
Custom
exceptions
namespaces,
and
yeah.
so forth. I'm wondering, could we do what we did in core uh, where we define the env as the no-GC env if they have chosen in core to have no-GC env. So if no-GC env from core is on, because you can opt out of no-GC env right now because it's experimental. And so basically reuse those flags, and then we define the env class as the no-GC env class. And then that's going to break everything, but only if they're in experimental. If they're not, then everything is going to work instead of proliferating these flags. I know it's a little less flexible than having a separate flag, because then you can be an experimental and still not worry about OGC. But then again, we have the opt out, right? In core. So if you opt out in core, then your env class would be defined classically, so to speak. And if you haven't opted out in core, then your env class could be defined as no GC, and then that'll break you.
Is there a flag we can use? Like, I prefer not to break people again because we already had like a bit of breakage and then doing it again super soon. Is that exact? Can we use that existing define to opt into just having the like basically to do that redefinition? And then it would just be a documentation thing that it's like, if you want to be really strict, just define this thing and it'll define all your M's as no GC, and now you're good, right? Or we can just leave it as documentation. Like, I think we might be getting to the point where we're like over engineering here, right? Like it's stuff that's been running and they didn't have a real problem, or else we probably would have heard about it. So it just keeps running, and now, you know, the people can, if they run into a problem, they got an easy fix, right?
Yeah.
To be honest, the only problem that people have had so far, like you said, they have been running there and there have been no problems, except for one, which is freeing memory in a tight loop because calling JavaScript functions is not an option, right? That's the only like real problem that we've had.
Yeah.
So if we address this problem, it will go away, and presumably there are no other problems. So I think you're right that documentation is probably enough. And then all the people who have filed issues, we can just tell them, okay, here's the solution we've come up with. And then those issues will presumably go away unless we've missed the spot. And then we'll be cruising, right? So yeah, I don't know that we need to get people to necessarily nudge people to use NoGC, because they haven't reported any complaints. I mean, even if they are releasing memory, if their use case is such that their objects aren't being created in a tight loop, we're fine. I
Sure.
mean,
Yeah.
it's a little less granular than it could be, but well, it's good enough for them, right?
Yeah, so I think it was good to consider it, but yeah, I think I'm convinced now, like, let's just document it and not complicate things anymore.
Okay.
But it's great that you've got it that way, that it'll just be like the magic works.
Yeah. So the implementation is pretty much done. If people can, take a look at that and the matching tests, and I'll just continue working on the documentation.
Okay, so that's the only thing you got left until you move it into like non-whip.
Yep.
Okay. Sounds good.
Mhm.
Okay, add release automation. This one. Okay, so this is basically a job that will actually do the release, right?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with this action that he's using here, this Google GitHub Actions release please action. I took a look a little bit at the documentation for it. I'm not exactly sure what all it does and does not do. So maybe we can
I've
can
seen
ask
it used on other projects, and like every time there's like a PR landed, it will update. There'll always be like a PR, which is like release, do the next release. And it'll be ready every time you land a PR, it'll update that same thing to say like, okay, here's what's in it. It's now Assembler major, Assembler minor, whatever. And then at some point we decide like, yeah, actually we want to make a release. And I think we land that PR. And that ends up, I guess it will then see that landed and publish the release. It's something like that. I haven't looked at one of the projects for a while, but it's along those lines. I remember the PR that constantly is floating there saying next release, and it keeps getting updated. So
I see.
I
Okay.
think it's a reasonable choice, like just off the top of my head is kind of what I was getting at, and I've seen it be used. So
Yeah, in React Native Windows project, we're using a component called Beach Ball. It probably does similar thing. Like, but what we actually do, like every time we have any PR, we also require to create special kind of change file. And in this file, we typically say what type of change is it? Is it patch or minor or major? And then kind of automated system kicks in and produces like every single PR produces new version, new release, and depending what you set in this change file.
Okay. Because that's
Right.
one thing I think that I actually remember about this now is that we would have to start using like in the actual PR like titles, you need to have like chore, uh minor, or I forget what they are, but like you got to put that information into the PR title so that it knows whether it's major, minor, or patch.
Right. That's what it said on the documentation that you
Right.
have
It's like,
to
yeah, it's
use
like chore feature.
conventional commits.
Yeah.
So, which makes sense, it gives us a little bit more structure to our project here as well. And then from there, it can determine whether it's minor, major, or
Yeah.
patch. Um,
So
if
maybe it
we
makes sense
go
for people to
to,
read up
if
on it.
Yeah, because we have documentation for what we need to do when we create a
Yeah.
release. Um, so maybe if we could take a look at, if what we usually do manually is done fully through this tool or not.
And like Vladimir, if you've seen other ones that work well, maybe you could post some comments that just say like, here's another one I see that works well, and we can look at a few of the options people have seen and figure out which fits best.
Yeah, let me read first about this Google GitHub Actions. Like maybe it's even better. I don't know. I'm not kind of the best engineer about
Yep.
the whole this release. So just using whatever other people already configured.
Okay, well, that's good to kick off us looking at that. And then I don't see anything really new here. So any ones that people want to discuss or dive into? If not, I'm gonna flip over to the node issues. This one I opened a little while ago. It's really just documentation to say don't use that get UV event loop function, because I looked in what I was thinking of in terms of us having deprecated files exists on the add-on, but not in core. So I just added some documentation that basically says, don't use this. It might end up, causing you to have something that doesn't run across versions.
I think there was a comment on it
Okay.
about suggesting an alternative.
Yeah, okay. So the alternative is okay, right, to mention that. Okay, I can do that.
Mhm.
We want to kind of add actual attribute, kind of, which will say that this specific function deprecated. So technically, people whenever they compile, they will see this warning.
Yeah, do we have any? I was looking to see whether we had anything else like that.
Yeah, it's like it's square bracket deprecated, square brackets.
Okay, so
So in
that'll
modern
like
plus.
that actually will come out. I wasn't sure. I think I saw that one or two places, so I can add that if we think that's a good idea as well.
So I think that's C++. We probably need to wrap it up inside of kind of macro, so it's only for C++ code. I actually don't know if C has any kind of attributes like this.
This is only since C23.
Right. But yeah,
So I guess it does, but not today.
the same syntax effectively. They just they didn't invent it. Just exactly the same what C++ use.
Right.
It's great.
Okay, but I don't think we can add that yet because We're
But we can
still,
have like a macro, so those
Yeah,
tuples.
I just did a search in our code and we apparently have used it for NAPI module register. We've marked that as deprecated using this square bracket deprecated.
okay.
Oops, I probably
So
did.
it's been we've used it in the past. Just throwing that out there.
So do we think that's gonna be an issue or?
Actually, it was actually a recommendation from Anna, as far as I remember, because it was probably part of my PR, and it was feedback from Anna. She said like it's what we should do, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, if we already have something in there, then adding another one shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, if you look on this node API .h, it's what probably Kevin referring to. Because this module registration was there, and probably yes, yeah, it's
94.
actually conditional. It's exactly what
Yeah,
yeah,
that's basically, it's under, if you're defining with C++. Okay, so, but if I just add in that same thing, that should do the trick.
right.
Okay, yep, I will add that in as well then. Let me just make to say. Discussion today we should also. Okay, did I actually get that? Nope.
I think we actually have a define for C++ because yeah, because this has to work with C compilers. I think this would work with C compilers, but I don't know why we had to define then.
Well, I think it was only introduced in C compilers for 23. We don't compile with that level for Node. We compile with an earlier version.
And we can probably expand it a bit, like instead of having this if and if for each function, we can probably just define some kind of node API underscore deprecated as a macro and use it in functions. And in future, like for C23, we can just simply define it for C as well. Like,
Yeah, true.
Oh, never mind. That was for extern C. Because like if you're in a C compiler, it doesn't understand extern C, but this is fine.
right. So yeah, proposals do the same stuff like we do for external C. Like let's define a macro for deprecated as well.
Good idea.
Because previously it was just single location, but now if we kind of want to do it in two different locations, maybe it's worth to put it in single place.
Do we maybe already have such a macro from from node core, but I don't know if we can include that unless we like split it out of an existing header. There's node core headers, they're usually C++ specific.
Yeah, in this case, we need to have this macro as a part of JS native API, right? So in this case, we can reuse it not only for Node API, but also for JS native API.h.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, might it make sense to sort of distill a header that can be used in both Node's core headers and JS native API, where that header contains only macros which work both with a C compiler and a C++ compiler, because then some of this infrastructure we can reuse between Node regular headers, internal headers and stuff, which are C++, which are assumed to be compiled using C++, and our headers, which must work with C compilers. And then, because like we're already copying a little bit of stuff from like the Node header infrastructure. But anyway, that's a longer term thing.
I think it would be great, like you said, copying definitions, not good. Right?
Okay, any other ones we should dive into? I think this one we might have said was going to, maybe we need to wait till there's a release. Once we do a release, we can close this one, but we said we are gonna wait.
Right, that's what we said.
Yeah, okay.
So it looks like in node.h we have node deprecated. I haven't looked at how it's defined and whether that definition can work with a C compiler. But if it does, it may be worth starting a new header with macro definitions that work in both a C and a C++ compiler, and then we can reuse those in JS native API.h. Because anybody else who adds a macro there in the future, they're going to find that their node build fails because of it's not able to build add-ons when they run the unit tests for JS native API. Because if I'm not mistaken, we have add-ons that build with a C compiler, so they're going to run into that. So it's gonna that will serve as kind of a filter for things that can go into that new file. So then we don't have to do our own deprecated thing.
I think that what happened, like some compilers like GCC and MSVC, we had this deprecated flag for a long time. So technically, because this new square bracket attribute is added in latest compilers, but all compilers have non-standard deprecated flag. So I guess it's possible to use even for C, but it will be like compiler specific.
That'll be a big fat macro.
Right. Like that. So there can be a lot of if, which checks what compiler you use and stuff, and we probably can do this interesting definition. But it would be nice to reuse it for internal and external code then, and maybe just borrow what like you said, existing one.
Okay, any other issues we should dive into?
I just looked at the definition for nodes deprecated, and it's quite nice. We have node clang at least 290 or node GNU-C at least 4.5.0, define node deprecated, attribute deprecated. We have decklist spec deprecated there. So yeah, it takes care of a lot of it for us, I think. And from what I can tell at a cursory glance, we could pull this out of here and just create like, I don't know, like a node C macros .h, which can then be included everywhere, and we can pull this out and reuse it for our headers. And actually, now that I think about it, there's kind of a wrinkle because we have something called node deprecated, right? But our stuff is not necessarily node specific. But we do have like an internals.h, right? So we could just rename the macro, like, node deprecated is defined. So just number defined JS native API deprecated to node deprecated. And then people doing different implementations they are already used to the fact that we have some headers which are part of JS native API, but only in Node, because we have optimizations for V8 stuff, like, like persistence and that kind of thing. And so we have like a V8 internals.h, if I remember correctly. And so we could, in our V8 internals.h, define a macro called JS native API deprecated, and then the implementation, the definition of that macro will come from this new common header that works in C and works in C++. And then alternative implementations are just going to have to define their own JS native API deprecated.h, or sorry, this macro, right? Or if it's good enough for them, they can reuse the node header behind the scenes, because then the API surface is still nice and clean and without any node-specific notation, the public API surface. And if that file happens to work for them, then more power to them. So I
Wait,
think
wait, wait, wait. Internal.h, it's not public API. Internal.h is C++ header file, which used
right.
for internal implementation. I would actually be against if we can must use it for public API.
No, no. Okay, okay. Let me think. Okay, you may be right. That is true. Hmm.
We need
Yeah,
public
okay.
API, right? We need to define the public API.
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'd have to think about it in more detail because like node deprecated may introduce like the sort of the concept that this is node specific and then we can't use it in JS native API.h just because of the name of the macro. But it's definitely worth spending some effort, in my opinion, to avoid copying the implementation that's in node.h and just reusing it and just try to find a way to make it sound good, look good, and not be duplicated.
Right, like imagine that somebody implements Node API in a Dino project or Bun project. You don't want to them to depend on some kind of internal Node API, Node.h file.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree entirely. Yeah. It's not as easy as I thought. So yeah, how we're gonna reuse that macro is more complicated than
I
just.
think it's much better to define it kind of copy, say, from internal Node.h stuff with Node to create special public file, copy it there, and then internally Node have their macro defined on top of this public one.
Oh, yes, that's a great idea. Yes. So the implementation is called JS Native API deprecated. And then internally, yes. And then in node.h, we just include the JS Native API
But
macros.h and rename it to node deprecated. Yes, that's exactly
it will be
right.
no duplication, but in this case, we change it a little bit internal,
Yes.
but public will be kind of clean and
Yes.
right.
Yes. Great idea. Yeah, just flip it around. Agreed.
The only question, like, do we want to have additional public header file or not? Like, or we should be good enough to put it inside of just native API types, where we typically have definitions like this.
No, my immediate reaction is yes, it's good. But I don't know all the implications of including a JS native API types.h in like a node internal like what is that called? A compilation unit. It may introduce stuff that we don't want, but then again, it may not. I think it's worth an experiment because it's definitely a good idea to have these public macros.
So, Michael, your PR just grown up a bit.
Yeah, well, I'll think about whether I do that in the PR or not. Like,
yeah, maybe it's
I
different.
might just add in the deprecated thing for the first part, and then like I can think about a follow-on one to because actually
Okay.
I may have a lot more discussion going on about totally unrelated things.
I would against adding the actual deprecation notation in the current PR because people might turn a deprecation to a error with a compilation flag. So adding the notation in the current PR might be breaking to some people. So I would strongly encourage to add it in a follow-up PR. So it's like the deprecation process. First, we go with document only deprecation, and then we go with actual deprecation in the header.
Yeah, that's a good point because normally we do go through a sort of set of increasing steps so that people by the time we actually cause something that might cause some breakage.
Yeah.
If we have 5 minutes, I have a quick question. I've seen like news this week that Google is planning to switch V8 from compiling in MSVC. They're switching completely to Clang, and I kind of looked. There are some issues in Node.js also kind of switching from MSVC to Clang. I wonder if is a part of this Node API work. Do we want to are we planning to deprecate MSVC as well, or just because we using directly API safe API, we're saying that we still you can create add-ons using MSVC. I just kind of curious what you guys' opinion about.
Question is,
I was just discussing this internally, that how the situation where Node is compatible with LAN and add-on was compatible with MSVC. I think in our case, Node API case, since people might not be using, but people might also be using the linked to state library. But I think that might be a problem if they use different state library versions, but I'm not sure if that'll be common in our case. So I haven't have any further research on it yet, but yeah.
I guess there's two parts, right? One is it going to break add-ons on Windows, like the compatibility across versions? And two, do we have any choice, right? Like basically V8 has said we're dropping support for it. And the project as a whole is saying, well, okay, we're going to move to compiling Node with, I think, GCC.
Why do we care, right? Like our add-ons are dynamic shared libraries which import a set of C functions.
I think it's
Right?
that they're linked against runtimes, which now may be different.
But the C API binary standard is the same. So the symbols will resolve,
I think it'll still run. The question might
right?
be
Clang or
that, like,
MSVC or anything else.
if there's anything going on behind the scenes, is there any problem with some of that happening with one runtime? If there's calls going on through Node and one happening with a different runtime going on through the add-on. I certainly don't know the details, but I think that's the concern that at least somebody raised, was that like with the two different runtimes, you're going to run
Mike,
into problems.
what I want to bring to discussion is actually we're definitely kind of node.js is going to switch to Clang, and because it's required, and people have whoever using this non-ABI safe APIs, they will have to switch to Clang, right? But what I guess my question is like as a part of this group about Node API, do we say like people who's using ABI safe API like Node API, NAPI, are we going to continue MSVC support for them or not? It's I guess it's what my question like.
Oh, I see.
Will they both? It's okay. So the first thing to understand, which I don't, yeah, I'm asking because I don't understand yet, is can can we support basically people compiling with MSVC or GCC, and that should just work, right? Like
We obviously
can.
yeah, because technically it's just C API. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But this separate shared libraries, nobody
Okay.
cares.
We
should
can't
compile
in
them.
core though. Like the add-ons that are part of the JS native HBI unit test suite in core will no longer be compiled with MSVC because the whole testing infrastructure will remove MSVC, right? But we can still compile Node add-on API with MSVC because it's a separate project, and the interface between them is a C API interface, binary interface, and so all the unit tests that we have in Node add-on API will continue to inform us as to how code compiled with MSVC behaves against this Node version, which is no longer compiled with MSVC. And if we did our jobs, then it'll just not care, right? And so we will still have some testing, just not in core anymore.
we should
that's what I think.
potentially run our unit tests in both. The challenge I could see going forward is that, like, we've sort of gotten the compilers for free because the main project was updating to new MSVC compilers and stuff like that. Those may no longer be installed on the systems or updated unless we drive that as a requirement. So that might be something we just need to make sure we encourage the people who are managing the Windows machines. There's some people from Microsoft, we'd want to say, well, okay, despite this switch, we still want your input on what's important MSVC versions, and we need those installed on the machines so that the Node API tests can continue to run.
Yep. So
I guess
at worst, we will lose ci.nodejs.org, right? And we will only have GitHub testing for PRs wherein MSVC runs. But as you said, Michael, we may not even lose ci.nodejs.org because we have folks from Microsoft maintaining those Windows servers. So it's the less than worst scenario is quite likely, actually.
it's another aspect. We build in all this Node API add-ons using Jeep, and the question if Jeep is going to remove support to MSVC or not. If they do, then we need to kind of add support for CMake or something. I don't know, like just
we forked Jip, haven't we? For Node, we maintain our own version of Jip.
Well, I think the problem primarily would be like there are some definitions in the common.jp, which also include some MSVC stuff. And yeah, we definitely, the Jip is forked by us, and it is maintained by the Node.js organization.
But that again would come back to making sure people who think it's important continue to maintain that versus like you can already build Node add-on API add-ons with CMake, right? So it's possible to use other options, just how easy it'll be. Really.
We'd have to push for this, and folks using, I don't know, Node add-on API we would now have to like get them to change their build system, right?
right. I just want to bring this kind of topics to think about. Like, we obviously can't solve it right now in 5 minutes. It's just something to think about. Like Node.js, it obviously will switch to client, but as we do like add-ons on this other side, do we still support MSVC? Or kind of, it's good
I don't
to know.
think we've excluded any compiler from add-ons so far, right? It's just that some are probably tested better than others.
Yeah, but...
yeah. So one thing that comes to mind regarding this common Jippy, you know, the project need not actively remove those conditionals which pertain to MSVC, because those conditionals will simply never happen again, right? For non-Node API add-ons, right? And so it may succumb to bit rot, in which case we will be the ones maintaining that particular conditional in the common Jippy. But I don't think there is any reason to actively remove it, right? Especially if we say, listen, we still kind of need this. We understand that we will not expect any support from upstream, but it doesn't hurt upstream to have this conditional in there, which will always be false for all intents and purposes except ours. And so it'll de facto fall to us to keep that condition fresh.
Well, yeah, I think that would be the point of how do we define the removal of support. Like after V8 13.0, they will remove all the MSVC stuff in their codebase, which they call it drop the support of MSVC. So in Node, if we are going to drop the support of MSVC, are we going to remove all MS related stuff in our code space? So I believe that would be the discussion, the argument of that definition. Because if we are not regularly actively test this stuff, those configuration would someday be outdated and might not be useful.
Yeah, so it may come back to there's a bunch of add-ons out there. You don't need to break the Node add-on API ones, right? Like if it was just the C++ ones, which just aren't going to work at all, then that would be one thing. But there is a bit of an argument to say, well, like there's no reason to remove these things from Node.js and break them, because like I think the argument might be like V8's a big code base, so supporting another compiler with all the wrinkles should be harder than supporting MSVC just for Node.js or just for Node add-on API, right? But I can see that discussion happening. You're right. You're right that like the initial thought might be, well, like we're never going to compile with it. Maybe we should just remove all this stuff, right? And then at least there is the argument that says you can avoid breaking Node add-on API based add-ons by not
Yeah.
doing that.
I think until all Node.js versions, all Node.js LTS versions are compatible with CLAN, we are not going to remove any
Right.
MSVC
Yeah.
support in JIP. So that would be a quite long time
Yeah,
before
so
it
actually you're
happens.
right that that'll definitely
Yeah.
happen.
So I guess we just kind of need to be on the lookout for a PR against NoJIP that removes this, just in case somebody thinks that that's part of it. And then that's where the discussion would happen, I guess.
And we have gotten to the point where there's more downloads of Node add-on API than NAN. So like I think that says that, I don't know if you'd say that's 50%, like it's in the 50-50 range. So, but that could say that like 50% of the add-ons are using
Potentially using MSVC,
Yeah.
yeah.
and could continue to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's not only continue to work. Imagine like at some point Microsoft produces like Visual Studio 2025. I don't know what's next version going to be. Like we need to update effectively JIP to support it. So technically the
Yeah.
question is like more like this.
Yeah.
We can just simply say like add-ons. We don't use JIP for add-ons anymore. We use CMake, for example. In this case, we're out of business supporting all these things. It will be a responsibility of CMake team, which already does. We just piggyback on it and never look back.
Yeah, but that's a pretty big migration though, because like you know the binding JIP is like pretty like standard. I think it's even there are even special cases in NPM where if there's a binding.jip present, then you do something. If there isn't, you do something else. So that's pretty deeply in there. Which is not to say that it has to stay that way, but I think that's a bigger migration than just you know keeping conditional from bit routing.
But I think the lucky thing is that we don't have to decide that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to bring it to discussion table. It's more like, let's think
Yeah.
about it. What
Yeah,
we're
no,
gonna do.
shit. Good point.
Cool. We're out of time a bit.
Okay, yeah, we're just past time. So anything else we should chat about before we close out for today? If not, thanks for everybody's time and we'll see you in GitHub and next time. Bye.
Yep. Talk to you
Right.
later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Have a good weekend. Bye.